Sloane thought she had pushed me neatly to the side a table in the foyer. No main course, no seat among the guests. I read the note on the invitation, then calmly slipped it back into the envelope. No tears, no scene, just one phone call. Because Oaken Hearth, the place she planned to use to humiliate me, belonged to me. The invitation had been sitting on my kitchen table since Tuesday morning, printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock. My daughter-in-law, Sloane, was throwing a lavish party to celebrate her 5th wedding anniversary with my son, Holden. I skimmed the elegant, looping calligraphy until my eyes caught on a small, handwritten note, scrawled at the very bottom. In Sloane's delicate handwriting, it read, "For Vivian, seating in the foyer. No main course service." I just stared at the words. I didn't cry and I didn't fly into a sudden rage. Instead, a cold, crystal-clear realization spread through my chest. For years, I had turned a blind eye to Sloane's little passive-aggressive jabs. I ignored the condescending looks she gave my home decor, and I bit my tongue when she treated me like an unpaid catering assistant at family holidays. Holden always stood by silently. I used to tell myself it was normal, that keeping the peace was just part of being a mother-in-law. I had raised Holden to be a man who avoided conflict at all costs, and that was my own doing. But this invitation crossed a brand new line. She was inviting me to a restaurant strictly to degrade me in public. I folded the paper perfectly along its creases and put it away. Then I walked into the living room and grabbed my laptop. I pulled up my online banking portal. Every single month, I transferred $800 to Holden's account as a little boost to help with their mortgage. I clicked on recurring transfers. I clicked delete. The confirmation message flashed green across the screen. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The overwhelming sense of relief actually surprised me. It was a small step, but it was my first. The restaurant Sloane had chosen for her grand anniversary bash was called the Oaken Hearth. What Sloane in her arrogance and Holden in his sheer complacency had completely forgotten or tuned out was one simple detail. It was high time I paid the Oaken Hearth a little visit. The Oaken Hearth was only a 20-minute drive away. It was a gorgeous, upscale, rustic place, not overly stuffy, but boasting an impeccable reputation for its food. The second I walked through the doors, the comforting smell of fresh coffee and roasted meats washed over me. Julian, the general manager, was standing behind the hostess stand, sorting through some paperwork. His face lit up the moment he saw me. "Vivian, so great to see you stopping by," he said, pouring me a fresh cup of coffee and handing it over the counter. I took a sip and smiled. When my husband passed away, I inherited the restaurant. I never made a secret of it, but I had stepped entirely out of the day-to-day operations, leaving Julian in charge of running the show. Holden knew this, of course, but apparently he had never bothered to mention it to Sloane, most likely, so he could play the role of the big-shot, generous husband, footing the bill. "Julian," I started, keeping my voice perfectly level. "There's a reservation in the books for this Saturday." Holden and Sloane. Julian nodded, pulling a clipboard from under the desk. "Yep, a private party of 50. Holden asked me to apply the usual 40% family discount. Everything is good to go." He slid the floor plan over to me. I immediately spotted the tiny table drawn out in the lobby foyer, completely isolated from the main banquet hall. My name was written right next to it. I tapped my index finger against the paper. "Leave the table exactly where it is, Julian, but pull the family discount. The party is going to be billed at full price. And instead of sending the invoice to me like you normally do, hand it directly to Holden at the end of the night. Julian raised a single eyebrow, but he didn't ask any questions. He'd known me long enough. "You got it, Vivian." I thanked him, finished my coffee, and walked out into the sunshine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. When I pulled into my driveway, the next surprise was already waiting for me on the porch. Two massive overflowing laundry baskets were sitting right in front of my front door. Pinned to the top was a sticky note. "Please iron by Friday. Sloan needs the blue dress for Saturday." I stood there looking at them. In the past, I would have let out a heavy sigh, lugged the heavy baskets inside, and spent my entire afternoon hunched over an ironing board. It had been a slow, creeping progression. First, it was just one dress shirt for Holden. Then it was their bed linens. Eventually, it became Sloan's delicate, dry clean-only dresses. And I had allowed it to happen. I unlocked my front door, but left the baskets exactly where they were on the porch. I stepped inside, shut the door firmly behind me, and put the kettle on for tea. 3 hours later, my cell phone rang. It was Holden. "Mom, Sloan dropped some stuff off earlier. Did you bring the laundry inside yet? It's supposed to pour tonight." His voice sounded the way it always did, a little insecure, a little entitled. "The laundry is still outside, Holden," I answered calmly, taking a sip of my chamomile. "What?" "Why, Mom Sloan's silk dress is in there. She's gonna lose her mind if it gets ruined." "Then you guys should probably come pick it up," I said. "I'm not a dry cleaning service. Starting today, I only wash and iron my own clothes." Dead silence echoed over the line for several seconds. "Mom, what has gotten into you all of a sudden? You always do this for us." Sloan was counting on it. "Habits change," I replied matter-of-factly. "I have other plans for my afternoon. Talk to you later, Holden." I hung up without waiting for his response. It felt incredibly foreign, but deeply right. I looked out the living room window. Dark storm clouds were rolling in fast. 20 minutes later, Holden's car sped into the driveway. He jumped out, shaking his head in disbelief, and frantically shoved the baskets into his trunk. I gave him a little wave from behind the glass. The new rules in this family were just starting to take effect, and I knew the next test was right around the corner. On Thursday morning, Sloan barged into my kitchen, totally unannounced. Wearing her usual tight-lipped, stressed expression, she dumped her designer purse on my dining table. "Vivian, we need your SUV this weekend," she demanded, not even bothering to say hello. "We have to haul all the floral centerpieces and party favors over to the oaken hearth. Our sedan is way too small." This was yet another established routine. My car was spacious and practical, so it was treated as the community loaner whenever it suited them. I stayed seated at the table, casually turned a page of my morning paper, and took a sip of my coffee. "The SUV isn't available this weekend, Sloan." She froze mid-step. "Excuse me, you aren't going anywhere this weekend. We need it." "That may be true," I said, never raising my voice. "But my car is staying in the garage." I stood up, opened the junk drawer, and tossed a small, rusted set of keys onto the table. "Here are the keys to the old Schwinn bicycle out in the shed. It has a nice big basket on the front. Maybe that'll help." Sloan's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. She stared at the bike keys like they were radioactive. "Is this some kind of sick joke? You're deliberately sabotaging our anniversary. First, you refuse to do the laundry now, the car. What is your problem?" I looked her dead in the eye. I saw a woman who was entirely used to bulldozing her way through life because no one had ever bothered to put up a stop sign. "My problem is that my property is not your personal free-for-all. If you need a vehicle with more cargo space, you can rent a U-Haul in town." I turned my back to her and placed my empty mug in the sink. Please pull the door shut when you leave. I heard her suck in a sharp breath, snatch her purse off the table, and stomp out of the house. The front door slammed so hard, the windows rattled. I knew Holden would be calling within 5 minutes to play the peacemaker, but I had already switched my phone to Do Not Disturb. My preparations for Saturday were officially complete. Saturday evening was mild and clear, full of stars. I slipped into a simple but elegant navy blue dress, pinned my hair up, and drove myself to the oaken hearth. The parking lot was already packed to the brim with cars belonging to Sloane's extended family and Holden's co-workers. I walked through the double doors. Soft jazz was playing over the speakers. The main banquet hall looked gorgeous, dripping with string lights and massive floral arrangements. Standing right at the entrance to the hall was Sloane holding a champagne flute and surrounded by her girlfriends. The moment she spotted me, her features hardened. She broke away from the group and marched over, a fake, painted-on smile plastered across her face. "Vivian, you actually showed up." "Of course. I got an invitation, didn't I?" I replied, politely. She crossed her arms. "Well, as the invitation explicitly stated, your seat is not in the main dining room. This is a highly exclusive event for our closest friends and most important guests. We had a spot set up for you out here in the foyer. You can get drinks, but the catered dinner is strictly for the banquet hall." She gestured toward a tiny, pathetic little table shoved in the corner near the coat check. It was a deliberate, calculated act of humiliation executed with ice-cold precision. I just nodded. "I understand." The foyer. No arguing, no scene. I walked right past her, headed straight for the little table by the coats, and sat down. I could feel the eyes of a few arriving guests lingering on me, some looking confused, others already whispering. Sloane strutted back into the main hall, looking incredibly smug, entirely convinced she had finally put me in my place. A young, nervous-looking waiter approached my table. "Ma'am, can I get you anything?" I gave him a warm smile. "Just a glass of iced water, please. And could you go let Julian know that I'm sitting out here now?" I pulled my phone out of my clutch. It was time to set the record straight. 10 minutes passed. From inside the hall, I could hear glasses clinking and someone tapping a microphone to start the speeches. I sipped my ice water and waited. Suddenly, the kitchen doors swung open and Julian marched out. His face was dead serious. He didn't walk over to my little table in the foyer. He bypassed me entirely and strode directly into the grand banquet hall. I stood up and leaned casually against the open door frame so I had a front row seat. Julian stopped dead center in front of the head table, where Sloane and Holden were sitting. The chatter at the table immediately died down. Mrs. Vance Julian said, his voice carrying enough volume to make the neighboring tables go quiet. "We have a slight logistical issue." Sloane gave him an irritated look. "What kind of issue?" "The first course was supposed to be plated 10 minutes ago. The food is ready to be served," Julian stated flatly. "But before my staff brings out a single plate, I need someone to explain to me why the owner of this establishment is currently seated by the coat rack and has been explicitly excluded from dinner service." An absolute suffocating silence dropped over the room. You could have heard a pin drop. Sloane blinked rapidly. "What owner? What on earth are you talking about?" Julian turned slightly and gestured straight toward the door frame where I was standing. "Mrs. Vivian Vance. She owns the Oaken Hearth. And as long as she is sitting out in the lobby without a meal, the kitchen is entirely closed to this room." Every single drop of color drained from Sloane's face. She whipped her head toward Holden, who was suddenly looking at his empty water glass like it held the secrets to the universe. Holden Sloan hissed. "Is this true?" He cleared his throat nervously, tugging at his collar. "Mom inherited the place from Dad. I thought I told you." He hadn't. He had let her believe he secured this high-end venue through his own deep pockets and savvy networking. "I thought we booked this place because you had connections." Sloan shrieked, her carefully crafted, elegant facade crumbling to dust. Julian cleared his throat loudly. "Well, now that we've cleared that up, I have one more piece of business regarding tonight's final tab." Julian slid the clipboard out from under his arm. "Since we're handling the formalities," he said, handing a crisp, white invoice directly to Holden. "Here is the updated cost breakdown for this evening's event." Holden took the paper, his eyes practically bugged out of his head. "Julian, this is almost double what we originally discussed. Where's the family discount?" "Mrs. Vance instructed me to waive the discount," Julian replied smoothly. "This is being processed as a standard corporate booking. Full retail price for 50 guests, including the premium dinner service, the open bar package, and the venue rental fee. That comes out to $8,500. Payable in full at the end of the night." Sloan audibly gasped, clutching her chest. "8,000, Holden. You told me this was practically free. You told me to invite everybody." Holden was visibly sweating now. He looked over at me with absolute sheer panic in his eyes. "Mom, please. We don't have this kind of cash. You know my paycheck doesn't cover this. And my banking app said you canceled the recurring transfer yesterday." Sloan snapped her head toward him again. "What recurring transfer?" "The $800 your mother-in-law contributes to your mortgage every month," I said, finally stepping out of the doorway and into the dining room. My voice was calm, carrying effortlessly through the dead silent hall. "But since I'm clearly not good enough to sit at a table and eat with you, I assumed you didn't need my financial support anymore either." Sloan looked like she was about to pass out. She had spent her entire marriage believing Holden was bringing in all that money himself. The grand illusion of her perfect, wealthy, independent lifestyle was shattering into a million tiny pieces right in front of her parents and her most important clients. "You can't do this to us," Sloan whispered, her fierce pride warring with absolute panic. "We have guests here. My family. Important people. I'm not doing anything to you," I replied effortlessly. "I am simply reacting to your choices." "Mom, please," Holden begged, actually standing up from his chair. "Reverse it. We can't pay for this. Let's just handle this like adults." I looked at my son. I saw the little boy whose messes I had constantly cleaned up and the grown man who had never once been forced to take accountability for anything in his life. "We are handling it like adults, Holden, and adults pay for the extravagant parties they decide to throw." I turned my attention to the manager. "Julian, go ahead and serve the food. But before you bring out the appetizers, make sure you swipe a credit card from Holden that will actually authorize for the full amount. If it declines, switch them to the basic chicken package. And pull the wine off the table." I turned around on my heels and walked at a leisurely pace out of the banquet hall, through the foyer, and out the front doors. No one said a single word. As the heavy doors swung shut behind me, I could hear the immediate explosion of frantic whispering, Sloan furiously tearing into Holden and Julian politely but firmly, asking for a MasterCard. I stepped out into the cool night air. I climbed into my SUV, the exact same car Sloan had demanded to use yesterday, and drove myself home. I didn't feel any malicious glee. It wasn't some sweet, vindictive revenge. It was just a massive, incredibly overdue course correction. When I got home, I filled up a hot water bottle, curled up on my sofa, and cracked open a good thriller. I found out later from Julian that Holden and Sloane had to severely downgrade the evening. They canceled the premium wine service, scrapped the dessert course, entirely had to split the massive bill across 2 different high-interest credit cards, and spent the rest of the night dodging painfully awkward questions from Sloane's parents. The night that was supposed to be my ultimate humiliation had instantly morphed into their ultimate reality check. I slept perfectly that night, deep and dreamless. The crushing weight of the constant, ungrateful expectations I had carried for years was completely gone. But I knew the inevitable fallout was coming the next morning. Sunday morning, Holden was standing on my porch. He looked entirely defeated, with deep bags under his eyes and his shoulders slumped forward. I let him in and poured him a mug of coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table in the exact same chair Sloane had occupied just a few days prior. "Last night was humiliating, Mom," he mumbled, staring into his black coffee. "You completely embarrassed Sloane in front of all our friends." "Sloane embarrassed herself," I corrected him without missing a beat. "All I did was lay the facts out on the table. You are the one who stood back and let her treat me like a leper." Holden fell quiet. He just kept staring into his mug. "How are we supposed to make our house payments now without your monthly transfers? And what about the credit card debt from last night? That sounds like a math problem for you to figure out, Holden. You're a grown man." I stood up, walked into the hallway, and brought back a small cardboard box I had packed up earlier that morning. I set it down on the table right in front of him. Inside were a few old photo albums, some of his high school yearbooks, and his dusty old tennis racket. "What is this?" he asked, looking thoroughly confused. "I'm cleaning out the attic," I explained. "I had a meeting with a realtor on Friday. I'm listing this house for sale. It's way too much square footage for just me." Holden's jaw practically hit the floor. "Selling it, but Mom, this is the family home. We always just assumed that Sloane and I would eventually move in here whenever I die. Or whenever you finally ship me off to a nursing home." I finished the sentence for him. "No, Holden. I'm going to use the equity from this house to buy myself a gorgeous little condo right downtown. The rest of the cash is going straight into my retirement portfolio so I can do some traveling." He looked absolutely gutted. His entire safety net, his free ride, and his guaranteed inheritance were vaporizing right in front of his eyes. "You're punishing us," he said bitterly. "No," I replied. "I'm freeing myself." 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Sloane. Her tone was incredibly soft, almost sickeningly sugary. "Vivian, hi. We really need to talk. Holden told me about you putting the house on the market. I really think we all just had some massive misunderstandings over the weekend, and I wanted to formally apologize." I held the phone to my ear, looking around at the freshly packed moving boxes stacked in my living room. I knew exactly what this was about. She had been doing the math. The real estate, the inheritance, the financial safety net. She was watching it all slip away. There were no misunderstandings whatsoever. "Sloane," I said cheerfully, but with a spine of steel, "you made it incredibly clear exactly where I rank in your family hierarchy. I heard you loud and clear, and I accept it. I just decided it was time to reallocate my own resources to match that ranking." "But Vivian, we're family." She practically wailed, the fake sweetness cracking instantly. "We are, but family requires basic respect. I'll be moving in a few weeks. I'll text you guys my new address once I get settled in. But moving forward, I'm going to have to ask that you only come by if you call and make plans with me first." I didn't wait around for her to argue. I just hung up the phone. A few months later, I moved into my new condo. It was bright, modern, and best of all, it was 100% mine. Holden and Sloan stopped calling as much. Without my money padding their lifestyle, they actually had to buckle down and focus on digging themselves out of their own financial holes, which took up a lot of their free time. There was never any huge, tearful, dramatic reconciliation. But there wasn't a permanent scorched earth estrangement either. We saw each other briefly around Christmas, drank some eggnog, and made stiff small talk about the weather. The dynamic was incredibly distant, but for the first time in a decade, it was entirely peaceful. I had officially retired from my role as their useful idiot. Nowadays, I spend a lot more of my time over at the oaken hearth. I sit at my absolute favorite table right in the center of the main dining room, never in the foyer, and I thoroughly enjoy my meals. I learned the hard way that true strength isn't about screaming matches or fighting for respect. It's about quietly, ruthlessly, and consistently enforcing your own boundaries. And honestly, that tastes sweeter than anything else on the menu.